Okay, good morning, everyone. So, we are going to just continue with the story from where we left off. Um, the story that we are discussing is called The Goldsmith and the Cashmere Singing Girl. So, in case you haven't read the first part of the story, just read the entire story and then listen to the rest of this video. Um, so, so basically, just to recap where we stopped, the goldsmith has reached the city of Kashmir, and he stayed there for a few days, trying to formulate a plan through which he can finally get this singing girl, and uh, he put that plan into action by sneaking into the palace of the minister, uh, uh, with whom the singing girl resides, and he did two things. He stole a casket of jewels that belonged to the singing girl, and he wounded her on her back. Okay, so very strange things it might seem, but this is all a part of his plan. And at that moment, Shahrazad, who is telling us the story as part of the 1001 Nights, she supposedly stopped saying the story because in her story, the story in which she is telling it to her husband, the king, the day started, the sun rose, and that is the time when Shahrazad will always stop telling her story. So, that is why this particular sentence we see here. Yeah. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased saying her permitted say. So this sentence tells us that the frame story is also continuing along with the story that we are currently reading. Okay, so the story that we are reading is only a part of a grander narrative. So that is something that we should always keep in mind. This is like the entire structure of these stories are like, uh, you know, have you seen these things called Matroska dolls from Russia? They are usually they are in the shape of a doll. There will be a big doll. When you unscrew that, inside that there will be another doll which is of the same shape but slightly smaller, and when you unscrew that there will be yet another doll inside. So like that, this is kind of like structured like an onion, right? You unpeel the layers of the onion one by one, and inside you find something which is similar. Okay, so just keep that in mind, because later on in another story that we'll be reading, we will see that this sort of a narrative is somewhat a postmodern technique, uh, because we are going to read a story by Borges, uh, in which we have somewhat a similar narrative, right? A narrative which contains yet another narrative within it. Okay, so that is just something interesting that you can keep in mind. Okay. So now let us continue with what the rest of the story is. When it was the 587th night, so this is part of the 1001 nights. So this story is continuing through the 587th night of the 1001 nights. So somewhat in the middle of the entire series of stories. That is where this particular story is located. All right. So this is Shahrazad speaking. She said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the goldsmith had entered the vizier's palace, he wounded the damsel slightly in the back parts, and taking the box which contained her jewels, wended his way." So Shahrazad is just recapping the story for the king, right? So what happened last night? It's like the serial episode in which every at the beginning of every episode there'll be a 30-second recap of what happened in the previous one. So this is something like that which Shahrazad gives to her husband. Okay. And when morning morrowed, he donned clothes after the fashion of men of learning and doctors of the law, and taking the jewel case, went in therewith to the king of the city, before whom he kissed the ground and said to him, O king, I am a devout man, withal a loyal well-wisher to thee, and come hither a pilgrim to thy court from the land of Khorasan, attracted by a report of thy just governance and righteous dealing with thy subjects, and minded to be thy under thy standard. Okay, so he is basically introducing himself as a learned man. This reminds us again of this scene from Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice, in which we see Portia appearing before the audience as this learned judge, not exactly a judge, a kind of a lawyer, and introducing herself as a kind of a expert on law. And she is going to judge whether Antonio should give a pound of flesh from his heart to the Jew. Okay, so somewhat a similar scene. We have somebody in disguise who is introducing himself as a learned man, and look at how he takes care to praise the king of Kashmir, and how Kashmir is famous for the great governance of its king, and how this particular learned person, he has come all the way from the distant land of Khorasan. Khorasan is another name for Persia, right? Arabia. So he says that he has come all the way from there, hearing of the great and wonderful way in which the king of Kashmir is ruling his country. Okay, and yeah, and he also says that minded to be under thy standard. I want to be under your standard. Standard means flag. Under your governance. That is basically what it means. Okay. So he continues. I reached the city at the last of the day, and finding the gate locked and barred, threw me down to sleep without the walls. So he says that it was very late by the time he reached the city, and these during these medieval times, cities used to be sort of safe places for people to live in, because at any time a city or a country might be attacked by enemies, and usually cities had these huge walls and gates which protected the people inside from external attacks. Okay, so every evening these gates would be shut, and people inside would be safe against any kind of night attack. Okay, but that also meant that travelers who come to the city during the night, they will have to spend time outside the city. So that is what happened to apparently to the goldsmith. Okay, so this is all a lie. I hope that is clear. So he says, but as I lay betwixt sleep and wake, behold, I saw four women come up, one riding on a broomstick, another on a wine jar, a third on an oven peel, and a fourth on a black bitch. And I knew that they were witches making for thy city. So look at what he's doing. He's sort of taking advantage of his knowledge that this king really hates witches and sorcerers and all kinds of magic, and that is why he says that he witnessed four women apparently riding a broomstick, or a wine jar, or an oven peel, or a black bitch, these kinds of supernatural things. And he's basically trying to impress the ruler that he was able to defeat all these supernatural enemies, and overcome the temptation that they were offering. Okay, anyway, so another interesting thing about all these things is broomstick, wine jar, oven peel, etc. All of these are domestic objects. These are things that you find in the house, especially in the kitchen, right? Or these are things which are usually handled by women, right? So during those times, minding the house, cooking, all these things were exclusively done by women, right? Because that was the gender structure of the gender roles assigned to women during that time, and even now, right? It is pretty much the same in rural cultures and rural societies all over the world, right? So these are things which are gender roles which are assigned to women. So a broomstick, a wine jar, an oven peel. Oven peel basically means just a covering of the oven, right? The A kind of a lid with which you cover the oven. Okay. And a black bitch. A bitch again is a female dog. So again, it is something. It is referring to a particular a kind of a gender, right? So all of this is somehow connected with what women do. Okay. All right. So I knew that they were witches making for thy city. One of them came up to me and kicked me with her foot and beat me with a fox's tail she had in her hand, hurting me grievously. Whereat I was wroth and smote her with a knife I had with me, wounding her in the back parts as she turned to flee from me. Okay, so this is what the the traveler did. Apparently, he was attacked by one of the witches, and he struck back and wounded the witch on her back parts. Okay. When she felt the wound and fled before me, and in her flight let drop this casket, which I picked up and opening, found these costly jewels therein. So do thou take it, for I have no need thereof, being a wanderer in the mountains, who hath rejected the world from my heart and renounced it and all that is in it, seeking only the face of Allah the Most High. So basically, he's saying this casket of jewels was left by the witch as she was running away from me. And by presenting this casket to the king, he is basically telling the king that, look, what I am saying is the truth. If I was lying or if I was a dishonest person, I would have simply kept this casket of jewels for myself. But since I am a pilgrim, since I am a holy man, somebody who is interested only in the grace of God, I am handing over this casket to you because you are the rightful ruler of this land. Okay. So this is very cunning because when something like this happens, the king will definitely have an inclination to trust this fellow, because otherwise, if this person was not trustworthy, why would he hand over this costly casket of jewels to the king? Okay, so all this is very cunningly laid out. Okay. Then he set the casket before the king and fared forth. So he just left. The king opened the box and, emptying out all the trinkets it contained, fell to turning them over with his hand till he chanced upon a necklace whereof he had made gift to the vizier to whom the girl belonged. Okay, so the king recognized a jewel which he had gifted to the minister, the vizier. Okay, so this is also a very common motif that we find in medieval stories or in folk tales, that is identifying somebody by identifying a piece of ornament. Okay, like for instance, in Ramayana, when Sita is abducted by Ravana and and is imprisoned in Lanka, Hanuman actually takes a ring of Rama all the way to Lanka, so that Sita can identify that he is a messenger that has been sent by Rama. Or in the case of the story of Dushyanta and Shakuntala, right? We have the story where Dushyantan, he promises to marry Shakuntala and then leaves, and because of a curse, forgets everything about Shakuntala. And then it is only later on when accidentally he recovers a ring that he had given to Shakuntala that he remembers the entire story. So this idea of seeing a ring and then identifying somebody or remembering something is a very commonly seen motive in in medieval stories. So that is the same thing that we see here. And it also tells us that you know uh, we have already discussed how this story is of Indian origin. So there is some somewhat a connection between those Indian tales that I mentioned and the kind of situation that we find here. The king recognizes this necklace as something that he had gifted to one of his ministers. Okay. So, seeing this, he called the minister in question and said to him, "This is the necklace I gave thee." He knew it at first sight and answered, "It is, and I gave it to a singing girl of mine." Quoth the king. Quoth means said, "Fetch that girl to me forthwith." Forthwith means immediately. So he fetched her to him, and he said, "Uncover her back parts and see if there be a wound therein or no." The vizier accordingly bared her backside, and finding a knife wound there, said, "Yes, O my lord, there is a wound." So look at this. The king immediately summons this girl, and just like inspecting an object, simply inspects her body to find whether there is a wound on her. And that the presence or absence of the wound is simply the proof that is required about her identity, whether she is a witch or not. There is no other kind of questioning or investigation or any kind of proof involved. It is just trusting the word of a stranger and a man, and then judging this girl just by that word, right? That is all that is happening. So what is happening is entirely unfair, because the girl is not allowed to explain or even say anything about her innocence, or about what she is or what she has experienced. Then said the king, "This is the witch of whom the devotee told me, and there can be no doubt of it," and bade cast her into the witch's well. So her guilt has been proved, and immediately the king gives her the punishment that is given to all witches. Right? The witches are just cast out into the well outside the city. So what is interesting here is, till now we haven't really heard a single, any kind of self assertive statement from the part of the singing girl, right? After all, she is a singing girl, somebody who is famous because of her voice, because of her ability to articulate, to sing. But she has been strangely silent, right? Her voice has been silenced. She has no ability to defend herself or to say anything in her defense during this trial. So that is really, an ironic element in this story. So they carried her thither at once. As soon as it was night and the goldsmith knew that his plot had succeeded, he repaired to the pit. To repair to the pit means he found his way to the well, taking with him a purse of 1,000 dinars, and entering into converse with the warder, sat talking with him till a third part of the night was past, when he broached the matter to him, saying, "Know, O my brother, that this girl is innocent of that they laid to her charge, and that it was I brought her this calamity upon her." Okay. So he befriends the jailer, the person who is in charge of this pit into which witches are cast, and he basically confesses to this person. Okay, he comes clean. He admits that it is because of his doing that the girl has been thrown into the pit. The girl is not really a witch. The girl is not really guilty. She has been punished because of a plan or a trick that this guy played upon the girl. Then he told him the whole story first and last, adding, "Take, O my brother, this purse of 1,000 dinars, and give me the damsel, that I may carry her to my own land, for these gold pieces will profit thee more than keeping her in prison. Okay. So basically, another transaction is taking place. So remember how the entire story has panned out. First of all, it was a transaction. Uh, you know, let us go back to the beginning of the story. What happened first? The painter who painted the singing girl's picture saw her image and transferred it into a painting, a canvas. So there is a transaction that is happening there from the image to painting. And this painting evoked an intense longing in the mind of the goldsmith, right? And then what happened? The goldsmith went to the singing girl's you know residence, and he stole her jewels. So yet another transaction is happening here, an exchange, not a a willing exchange, a kind of a forced exchange, a one-sided exchange in which the the goldsmith snatches her jewels. And then what happened? There is another exchange happening between the king and the wazir, right? The king asks the wazir to bring the singing girl, and then they inspect her. And then what happens? The king brands her as a witch, takes her away from the wazir, and casts her into the pit. Yet another transaction. Just like you take an object away from somebody and then do something to that object, the girl has been part of the made to become a part of this transaction, taken away from the wazir and made into a witch. And now this is yet another transaction that is taking place between the jailer in charge of this pit and the goldsmith. So here, gold is being exchanged in return for the girl. Okay. So just like you buy something, this girl is also being bought. Okay. So give me the damsel that I may carry her to my own land, for these gold pieces will profit thee more than keeping her in prison. Moreover, Allah will requite thee for us, and we two will both offer up prayers for thy prosperity and safety. So we two here means both the girl and the goldsmith. They will together offer up prayers for the prosperity and safety of this jailer. Okay. So when the warder heard the story, he marveled with exceeding marvel at that device and its success. Then taking the money, he delivered the girl to the goldsmith, conditioning that he should not abide 1 hour with her in the city. So the goldsmith finally gets the girl, and the only condition is that he must leave the city immediately. Thereupon the goldsmith took the girl and fared on with her without ceasing. Okay, so he just traveled non-stop till he reached his own country, and so he won his wish. So this is the story, right? Uh, so you know, so the at the end of the story, we are left to wonder, what really is the will of the singing girl. Has anybody really consulted her about any of these things? It seems as if the only thing that she was guilty of was her appearance, her beauty, and everything else seems to flow from that. Just because of her appearance, just because of her physical or external beauty, she has been valued by all these men surrounding her, and made to encounter all these different transactions and comparisons to objects, and evaluations and judgments, and finally she becomes the property of the person who harmed her, right? So we should remember that this is the same person who went and stabbed her with a knife, uh, you know, without any other introduction. This was their first meeting, and his action was to stab her with a knife. And she finally ends up as his property. Okay. So it is really interesting to see this picture from the point of view of of the singing girl, And uh, and I think this is, this is something that all of you can also do as a sort of an exercise. In fact, I think we can actually do a small assignment on this, right? So all of you can, possibly imagine, uh, you know, imagine that this singing girl keeps a diary with her, recording every day what happens, recording her life every day. So put yourself in the shoes of the singing girl and try to imagine what her diary entries would be during these couple of days. The day on which, uh, this robber entered into her room and stole her jewels and wounded her with a knife. And then the next day, or a couple of days later, when she was summoned before the king and branded as a witch and cast into the well. Imagine these events and how she would write them down. Imagine that this, she's writing all this during her travel with the goldsmith back to back to his homeland, as has his possession now. How, what kind of attitude would she have towards this goldsmith, uh, you know who is responsible for all these things that had happened to her? But now she must also be dependent on him for her own existence. So, the assignment that you can do is write the diary entries that this girl, the singing girl, must have made in her diary. Put yourself into the mindset of the singing girl and write the diary entries for these three events. Right, the day on which she was wounded and her jewels were taken away, the day on which she was judged and cast into the pit as a witch, and finally, the day the day afterwards when she is traveling with the goldsmith as her as his property, as his wife or whatever, right? So do this assignment, and I will send you a link where you can upload this assignment, and it will be really interesting to see uh, you know what kind of thoughts you might imagine from the point of view of this singing girl. Okay. So that is the story, the Goldsmith and the Kashmir Singing Girl. So in case you have any other doubts or any other questions or observations about the story, we will take it up in the next class. Also, I will circulate the story for the next class today itself, so that you can begin reading. And next week we will begin with the third story. Okay.